Let's have a conversation about victimless crimes, and I think that's something that we should be talking about. Victimless crimes are usually something that's thought of as only involving consenting adults, or it only involves the perpetrator. And the idea with that is that no one is getting hurt by the actions of the said perpetrator. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed therapist. And again, talking about victimless crimes, it can, this policy can vary state by state in terms of legally how your state, city, or county defines it. But generally speaking, a victimless crime is usually thought of as only involving the perpetrator, meaning that no harm is coming from someone else. And so examples of that would be something like gambling, using illicit substances, or involving consenting adults, which would be someone like engaging ladies or men of the night. Another example would be like, carrying contraband, and assisted unaliving would be an example of like a victimless crime. There are people who argue that there is no such thing as a victimless crime. And Dr. Jones is one of those people. There are, in that argument says that, there is someone who's paying the price of a said things somewhere down the line. Usually it falls back on to society. So for an example, if you're engaging with the lady of the night, like you're purchasing that, you are, in my opinion, even though people are able to do that in certain areas, a lot of times what you're engaging in is purchasing of someone who needs has a need for something. So they may need food, they may need their own illicit substances, they may need a place to stay. They may also have a record, and so they don't really have a means to, earn a livable wage doing something else. Either way, although that person is consenting, in my opinion, that person is still what I consider to be a vulnerable adult, meaning like, do they really have the power to consent, or are they consenting because they got to eat or they got to get, high or whatever? Still, there are others that advocate that, hey, if a person they're not hurting anybody but themselves, you have the right to hurt yourself if you want to. And who am I to get in the way of doing that? We're all adults. People really should have free will if they want. When we talk about planning things, such things that are much more elaborate, such as a large group of people, and there was an intervention, like counselors, we are legally, what we go by here is UC Regents versus Tarasoff, which leads me to another post I'm going to talk about later, which is where if you identify a target or a time or a place where you're going to do something, we're required by law to report that. And if law happens to intervene, does that still make that victimless? And my argument would be something such that no, it's not. There are a lot of people that had to get involved in that. There are people that are still involved as a secondary reaction to that. So an example would be like your parents. Your parents now are faced with something, family members, other people that may have known you. So for an example, I'll use myself as an example. I remember when I used to, many years ago, I worked as a grocery store clerk. I did that for many years. Great job. I loved it. I met a lot of people. People still remember me from that. But anyhow, I worked with a guy who ended up unaliving someone. And, all of us were like, I worked in a grocery store for a long time. And so it was really like a kick it crew. We kind of laid back. We were all friends with each other. And that was the time when you go to work and you love everybody at your job. That's one of the reasons why I love that job. I loved everybody at my job. We all loved each other. So we all had like a vibe going. And, I just remember, like, we saw it, back then, the grocery store would carry the newspaper, and bam, he's right there on the front page of the newspaper. And I just remember, like, how hurt we all were, and just like, there was secondary trauma from that. Like, oh my gosh, that could have been any one of us. How long had he been thinking of that? And he was a young guy too. He's like 15, 16. So he got life for his crime. And just like, how long had he been thinking that? And just like, there's this like vicarious trauma that you get from like just sort of walking around amongst someone who has done that. It's also happened to me at corrections. I think it was in my last year working there, several officers month after month after month, week after week after week, took themselves out. And one guy, he this isn't to gloat or anything. I'm just telling you about my experience. One guy, he took out his son, his toddler, his baby, and himself. So it was murder, unaliving, suicide. And a lot of people were very hurt by that. Like, whoa, I've been working with this guy for years. That like scares you. And like, you go to bed. Like for me, I went to bed and I was like up thinking about that. And, we're talking about it. We're all like trying to process and, having meetings and things like that about it. And it's just this thing where it does affect you. And it moves your spirit. So people can be impacted and psychologically harmed by something, even if, they weren't the direct victim. The other thing is this too, which, there's a big debate and long-standing debate in just psychology about this, is like, even through learning about things through television and seeing violence on television and how that impacts children and adults alike who witness it. Everything from violent video games to violent movies to watching true crime and things like that. Those things have an impact. In fact, if for me, I've worked with people who've done large killings, right, or done large unalivings, and sometimes people get their motivation or their inspiration through what they see on television. And a good example of this, I'll use a benign example, is I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Falling Down with Michael Douglas, one of what I think is one of his best movies outside of Fatal Attraction. I think that movie would do big numbers right now at a time like now. But in that movie, Michael Douglas is like, he's mad about what's going on the interstate. And he has like, I think it's I don't know if I could say it, but it's like a big weapon. And so he's like trying to figure out how to use it. And here comes this little kid. He's like, man, what movie are you shooting for? I can help you work this thing. And this kid, like, he knows how to work this big thing. And he's like helping Michael Douglas because he doesn't know what he's doing. And he's like, here's how you do it, and blah. And, he's like, okay, well, back up, and I'm getting ready to do this thing. And like, they were just like so impressed that he has this thing on the interstate, and all these kids are like looking like, wow, this is fantastic. We're going to be in this movie. And, but that's an example of how people learn things and they idolize things that they see on television or they hear people talking about. And I've worked with a number of men and women who have done things based off of the idolization or the inspiration that they got from somebody else. So let me know what you guys think. I hope that helps, and we'll talk soon.